What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Debbie Route YouTube channel. We are back with another top 25 team. We're going to TCU Horned Frogs. If you ever listen to any part of my show, I was a TCU guy last year. I actually called them winning the Big 12. I said they could be the sleeper, and then they beat my team in the playoffs. Now I hate them, but we are back, 2022 TCU. We're going to dive into kind of what they did last year really quick, but then we're going to get into this next year. I think this is an interesting year for Sonny Dykes, losing an offensive coordinator. They lost a lot of talent, at least on the offensive side of the ball. I know they're bringing back, I think, 7 or 8 starters on the defense, but they did lose some impact players there as well. So we're going to be diving in, full depth chart breakdown, schedule breakdown, everything that you would want if you're a TCU fan, college football fan, preparing for the season. So after the intro, we'll get into it. All right, let's get into TCU and what they got. Last year they had just one of the best seasons in school history. They finished 13-2. They played for a Big 12 title, lost in that to Kansas State, but they were right there at the end. Then they went to the playoff and they beat Michigan 51-45. Then we don't talk about the college football championship. I think fans want to get out of that. They did lose 65-7, but you have to give them credit for what they were able to build last year. And Sonny Dykes coming over there. And that offense was high flying. When you see the offense points per game, they were 9th in the country at 38.8. Opponents' points per game, they did give up a little bit on the defensive side, but I will say the one thing they did on defense was they bend, not break. Like when you look at what they were able to do, they were able to get big stops and big moments and win games. And that's what you have to like from this team. Obviously, they had Max Duggan, Kendre Miller, all of those guys that we'll get into there, but you have to be very, very happy with what TCU did last year. Now, let's dive into what they have this year. Let's talk about their offensive line. What are we seeing out there at that offensive line, Christian?
Consistency at the tackle position. And I think that that's a really key point when we talk about this TCU offense and the importance of those two tackles. Brandon Coleman and Andrew Coker played really, really well last year, and it kind of allowed Max Duggan to take that next step. There is some turnover on the interior. John Lands did play over 400 snaps. He's kind of like a pseudo returner. He was one of those rotational guys. Garrett Hayes did not play a whole lot last year. Willis Patrick is coming over from Jackson State. They like him. I think they should like him. He played pretty well last year, but there is some different faces on that interior offensive line. So that's going to be a test. I think, you're comfortable with your tackles, but they lost Steve Avila, which I think was the big loss on this offensive line, where that was a good football player, and he kind of helped drive that run game. We'll see if this interior offensive line can kind of carry that torch forward. I'm a little skeptical that they can, but, I think the passing attack is still pretty good because of those tackles.
Yeah, Andrew Coker, he graded out as one of the best pass blocking, efficient right tackles in college football last year at 97.6. And him and Brandon Coleman are legitimate NFL prospects. I think when you're looking at that, you're talking about not day one guys, but guys that can definitely get drafted on this line. And I like Willis Patrick. Jackson State, we've talked about a lot of Jackson State transfers, when we've seen that what they've been able to do there. So you have to give them credit there. When you're looking at offense, so let's talk about this offense because they had a lot of turnover there. I think the big thing is Chandler Morris. So Chandler Morris is going to start this year. Many thought he was going to start last year, and had he not gotten a little banged up, he might have. Max Duggan kind of being the backup in that role. They had backup, Chance Nolan from Oregon State. Running back room is, Trey Sanders is coming over. Trey Sanders is still playing college football, former Alabama recruit. Then you have Imani Bailey, who transferred there from last year from Louisiana Monroe. Trent Battle, you have a lot of different guys in that running back room. Wide receiver room took a little bit of a hit with Jordan Hudson transferring. Then you had Quentin Johnson, all of these things there. What stands out to you about this depth chart? What stands out to you? What is the most important guy maybe on this roster?
Chandler Morris, I think, is probably the most important. And, I think when you look at what Max Duggan did last year, obviously you're happy with that. As a TCU fan, he was a Heisman finalist. He led them to the playoffs. But there are still reports that he was being outplayed by Chandler Morris in practice, especially leading up to that national championship game. But it was wrong of them to take that starting job away after what he did. The reports are that Chandler Morris was always kind of better. And like you said, had he not been banged up, I think we're talking about Chandler Morris in the Heisman finalist going to New York. And so I think that that's an important piece to this, because I don't think this coaching staff sees Chandler Morris as a big downgrade, and they might actually look at this as an upgrade. Without Quentin Johnston, it's a little bit more challenging, but they did bring in those transfers, and there have been some really good reports about JoJo Earl and JP Richardson and what they could provide. I think they're going to like Jalen Robinson as well. So, and Jack Beck too, LSU transfer. I think that that's kind of a big one. We have, if you get the manifesto, we have slots for X, Z, and slot receivers. This offense runs four wideouts a ton. Jack Beck is kind of going to be that F kind of move tight end type of piece with Jared Wiley still on the field, I think. So there are definitely options for them in the passing attack. If Chandler Morris can be, 80 to 90% of what Max Duggan was, I still think this is going to be a good offense this year.
Yeah, they got to get some guys to step up. We'll talk about that. Wide receiver room, yeah. Who can be that guy that's going to kind of step up after losing two big pieces, or three actually? If you're looking at some of the guys, Darius Davis as well, going on and moving on to the NFL. Now, when we're talking about notable losses, we've kind of mentioned them: Max Duggan, Kendre Miller, Quentin Johnston, on the light, and then Steve Avila, and who I wish went to the Cowboys. Yeah, when you're looking at those guys, yeah, this was a big step. But I will say, from the quarterback perspective, I don't think it's that huge of a loss. I do think the running backs that they have, I think Amani Bailey's kind of underrated in terms of taking over for Kendre Miller. Quentin Johnston as well. Obviously, he started off slow last year, but he was able to come on. And a guy like Quentin is someone that you're not necessarily going to replace him, first round NFL draft pick, but your hope is everybody that they brought in will be able to collectively replace that production, probably maybe a little bit more spread out, four wide. You talked about that offense. You have to love to see that. Anything on their losses that we haven't covered?
No, I think you hit it. I mean, Quentin Johnston's kind of the big one, but Savion Williams was good last year. I'd like to see DJ Allen on the field this year. I think that is a big step for this offense to kind of take a step forward. You're right about Kendre Miller's kind of a big loss. I do still have belief in Trey Sanders. Former 5-star recruit. He had that, I think, motorcycle incident a few years ago, right? I think it was a motorcycle. It was some type of accident. They kind of derailed him, and then he just never really got on the field. I think with opportunity, we'll see that he's still a pretty talented back, and they kind of like Cameron Cook from what I've gathered. So I think they are also pretty comfortable with that running back room, despite losing, one of the best backs in the nation in Kendre Miller last year.
Yeah, 100%. And then when you look at the recruiting cycle, they did really go after the defensive side. We'll talk about that. We're going to dive into that. But on the offensive side, I thought they went after high-level guys, 20th ranked composite rank on 247 Sports, and they recruited the hell out of Texas. 18 guys coming out of Texas here. So they definitely know where their bread and butter is. And I think the big guy is Cordell Russell, 4-star kid, number 12 rated wide receiver of the class, 6'2", 200. Like, they have really, really high hopes from him, from everything that I've read and heard about. Cameron Cook as well. You have to like what he is. Smaller side, 5'10", 180. Probably going to redshirt if I had to guess, but top 20 running back at that position. But yeah, just going back to Russell, like, I think when you're looking at him, what he can do, they were very, very high on him coming in. This is a perfect system for him. Like, you have to love that about him. And those two guys, and Russell was early enrollee. So being an early enrollee, him and Lafayette as well, the tight end, and then Jordan Bailey as well. Those guys were all early enrollees. So they're going to get out there a little early. That was huge for Russell to maybe see the field this year.
Yeah, and especially in this offense, when they're rolling so many of them out, they need a lot of them. So, it wouldn't shock me to see a little more freshman usage. Cordell Russell certainly has a skill set that would, translate pretty quickly to the college football game. So I'm excited to see if he does work onto the field in a rotational role, but, he could be an impact player come the end of the year, I think.
Yeah, he can. I think with Hudson moving on, they need someone like that. I think that's the key. Key transfers, they brought in a lot of guys. So, Chance Nolan, Trey Sanders, JoJo Earl, Dylan Wright, I think is an underrated wide receiver that they brought in. Willis Patrick, Tommy Brockermeyer, and then Jack Beck. I'll let you talk about the offensive lineman because, you love that stuff. I'll talk about JoJo real quick. I do think JoJo Earl, when he just didn't play at Alabama. He got hurt. They have him do those stupid kickoff returns and punt returns, and it just didn't pan out for JoJo. When you watch JoJo's tape, though, at Texas, when he was playing in high school, this dude was phenomenal. Like, he had some of the funny, like, he was making guys just miss all over the field. He was a stud in high school. So the hope is that they can kind of translate that as well to the TCU system. And they need a guy like this, that playmaker, kind of that big play guy. They use JoJo in the Wildcat as well in high school. So I've watched a lot of his tape. If they can be like very creative in this offensive system that is, JoJo could really step up. I have high hopes for JoJo. And I think if you've drafted him and like if you play college fantasy, those type of things, you're hoping for that breakout year. But he's there. I didn't put Jalen Robinson, but he's another wide receiver. There's just so many damn transfers, I couldn't put them all on there. Dylan Wright as well. Like there's a lot of guys coming here.
Yeah, JP Richardson as well. They
Yeah.
brought in a ton from the transfer portal. I do want to mention Tommy Brockermeyer. We talked about how the tackles here played really well last year. I think Brockermeyer is one of those rotational pieces that could fit, on certain downs. Last year, he didn't really get in for Alabama, but this is another high recruit, very good high school film. I think, he just wanted to see the field in Alabama, and I don't know that he was necessarily super comfortable there. Heads to TCU, I think, more of a future play.
Yeah.
I think he'll probably be the 2024 starting left tackle if I had to guess. But yeah, I think they did a really really good job in just making sure that those losses weren't felt as much. Losing a core like they did last year, you need a lot of players to kind of compensate for that, and I think they did fantastic at doing that.
They did a good job. I will say, because of all these guys, the gelling is going to be important. Like they're going to have to really on that offensive side be ready to gel. And when we're talking about impact players, it really comes down to one kid, Chandler Morris. Like, what can Morris do? Is he going to be able to elevate this offense? And he does have a lot of pressure on him. Like, this is a TCU team that went to the playoff and went to play for a national title. Like, and I think realistic expectations, they over exceeded what their expectations were last year. But competing for a Big 12 title, Morris has got to get him there. So on the offensive side, it just comes down to him. And like you mentioned earlier, I think Savion Williams is very underrated. I wrote about him in the manifesto. I talked about him. I think that he could really kind of step up. He did a little bit at times last year, 4 touchdowns, 392 yards. But if Savion can kind of step up as that guy that they really could look to, I think Savion could have a big year with Morris.
He's got some skill set that he could compensate for that loss of Quentin.
Yeah.
He can do a lot of the same things. He's more of a field stretcher, I think, than Quentin is also that. It was just they kind of figured out that they needed to get the ball in his hands. I think they have JoJo for that on the underneath stuff, and I think Savion can keep that role as a downfield threat. But yeah, you're right. It comes down to Chandler Morris. I do have high hopes for him. I think he's a good player. You love hearing reports that he was still out playing Max Duggan towards the end of the year last year in practices. So you'd like to see that carry over to the field this year. And, I think that sets the ceiling and the floor for this TCU offense.
Yeah. Well, let's go over the defense because, like we said, percentage of 200 snap starters return is 82%. So we have seen they did a pretty good job of getting returners to come back and keeping their guys, but they did struggle last year. Like I mentioned when we were talking about the stats, like, points against was not very good. They didn't break, but they've been a lot. So what can we expect from this defense and what they got coming back?
Yeah, so they have a lot of fine players. This TCU defense wasn't, a fantastic defense last year. I will say that, but I do think that they have, I keep talking about it, but continuity, especially on that side of the ball right now, when there is so much turnover on offense, they're going to need to rely on these guys that are returning to kind of keep them in games at times. There are a few impact players on this team. I think the Hodge, Jamoy Hodge, and Johnny Hodges. I can't believe that they rolled out 3 guys with Hodge in their name last year with Hodges Tomlinson as well. But I think those two, transfer Avery Helm are going to be super important to this defense kind of succeeding this year.
Yeah, I mean that's really the case with them. When we're talking about guys that they lost, they did lose a lot. Like when you're looking at here, there's some notable losses on that team. And what I did is I went through guys that are on an NFL roster that made that NFL roster, and maybe they struggled or maybe they were kind of underperformed. The big one is Tomlinson, honestly. So he was the kind of the guy there. I know D Winters though, like D Winters, when you're looking at what he did for that team last year, him and even Dylan Horton. So Dylan Horton and D Winters, they were responsible for 60% of the team sacks. So they got to get on that defensive line somewhere. You got to find that. So they definitely lost that pressure up front. So that's really what they're going to have to kind of focus on. I thought they did a good job in the portal, and we'll get into that on the corners. But yeah, so you're seeing that edge and getting after the quarterback, and then also in the secondary, that's where their losses came from.
Yeah, and I will say on the pass rushing side of things, they don't have a ton of guys that have experience in sack production and kind of getting to the quarterback. So I think they hope that Tymon Mitchell is going to take that next step. I think they hope that Nnamdi Obiazor is going to, be able to kind of fill some of those holes. But I do think that, if there's one question, it's how are they going to get to the passer? And if they don't, is the secondary going to hold up behind it?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's where they're gonna, and in the Big 12, that's where they're gonna struggle. If that's a problem, they can't get after the pass. The quarterback. They struggle on the backside, especially in the defensive side, defensive backfield. They're gonna struggle in the Big 12. I mean, let's just be real with what that is. When you look at recruits, though, man, they would have the defense. But I was doing this sheet, I was like, damn it, how many defensive players I got to put on this thing? Like, so Randon Fontenette is safety out of Freeport, Texas, 4-star kid, top 20 guy at his position. I thought that was a big get for them, especially because we just talked about how important that secondary is going to be. Even Avion Carter, I think they've talked about Avion Carter being that guy, 6'4", 260, Amarillo, Texas. He's a big gun. And if you're talking about needing help on that defensive line, Avion is someone that really stood out to me from that perspective of going through all these recruits. And then Marcus Deal, I think, again, when you're looking at what Deal is going to bring to the table, all of these guys are going to allow them to kind of shore up where they had holes and then kind of develop into that. So, I thought they did a good job, and you could tell they shotgun this thing. They got as many athletes, as many people they could in that secondary and the defensive line and edge rushers, and they said, hey, that's how we're going to fill this thing.
Yeah, they went after the premium positions, which is, the smart way to build out a defense, especially, I mentioned this defense wasn't that great last year. And I think that leaves the door open for some of these freshmen to kind of come and potentially win some playing time fairly early. I wouldn't be shocked to see some of these defensive linemen on the field, especially. I think, the secondary, they're probably going to take a year. But overall, it's tough to get mad at a class where we can't even put a player on the graphic. We have to put the frog because there are so many of them. So
Yeah.
I love what they did.
Yeah, and it wouldn't shock me for Fontenette or Johnson to switch maybe a corner. Like there is, I think when you're looking at them and where they can be, I think that they're pretty versatile. Johnson as well. Like I think Johnson might be able to play that dual role for them. So that was good. I thought they went out and grabbed those guys and went there. Now we're talking about transfers. Who do they get coming in? Key transfers here. They did bring in a lot. They attacked the transfer portal on the offensive side, as you saw, and on the defensive side, they're pretty deliberate. So they got Tico Brown. Tico's coming over from, oh man, I think it's Ohio. I'm terrible with that logo, but Tico Brown, Rick Diabro, and then Avery Helm. Avery Helm, probably the big one from Florida, cornerback. He's coming as a 4-star transfer, so he was definitely one of those guys that they targeted. Avery's got to step up. Avery's got to be that guy, right?
Yes, for sure. I think, that's the one of this group that I think will start from day one. And when you look at, I talked about the defensive line and how we have some questions there. I think they're hoping that one of Tico or Rick Diabreu is able to kind of make that step. Also,
Yeah.
it's Missouri State, I think, that he's coming over from. So,
my bad.
Yeah, it's all good. But yeah, I mean, I think they went pretty light on this side of things because they went so hard in recruiting. But these guys could absolutely end up on the field when the season ends. I wouldn't be shocked if all three of these guys are actually starting players for them.
Yeah, I mean Avery's got to start right away. Yeah, when you're looking at the impact players, I think Josh Norton's got to be on there. I think that they have high hopes for Josh, Mark Perry as well. I do see the name that keeps popping up, and they keep talking about that he was inconsistent at times with Dominic Williams, young kid on that line, like we've been mentioning. Dominic has got to be that guy that maybe coaching staff and the defensive line coach and everybody there, especially looking at the 247 reports and the spring practices and all of that. They said, well, we need Williams to kind of be that guy, kind of step up. He had big games last year. He had some games where people were very happy with him on the defensive side. But if Dominic can step up at that nose tackle position, then I think the concerns on that defensive line goes away a little bit. Like, okay, hey, he's going to be the next man up in this line. And when you look at him, he had 27 tackles. He had 12 solo. He did have, almost 2 sacks, 4.5 tackles for loss. So he did pretty well last year, but he's definitely got to take that next step.
Yeah, I think they've got to be pretty encouraged from his Big 12 championship game performance.
Yeah.
That was, kind of his breakout game. Like you said, he had a few flashes throughout the year, but obviously he struggled a little bit against Michigan and Georgia. I think that's kind of understandable with where that TCU team was playing competition wise prior to those games. But overall, I think you're hoping for that next step. And, if he can kind of shore up the middle, help the run game a little bit. That's going to help everything out. So yeah, I think he's got to be an impact player for this team to really hit their ceiling on defense.
Yeah. All right. Let's get into the schedule because schedule's a little fun on this one. I love that first game, baby. Give me Colorado. Give me Prime and Colorado. Gonna be on. It's gonna be.
It's ESPN.
ESPN. It's gonna be on every TV around the country. So TCU has a chance to go out there and just embarrass Dion. And we're talking about that. It could be a huge game for them. I think it's great. It's gonna be national, especially too. Like I think there's a little bit of pride for TCU. The last time we watched TCU, they got beat 65-7. And I think there's going to be something like, hey, we want to come out and show that last year wasn't a fluke. And then, when you're looking at the, Nichols, Houston, SMU, West Virginia, Iowa State, BYU, and then you got the games that, I think they have a really tough stretch. Kansas State, Texas Tech, Texas, Baylor, Oklahoma. Like that is a very, very tough 5-game stretch right there. It's going to be hard to see them really go undefeated in that stretch. If they can come out of that 3-2, I think they'd be very, very happy as a program. And then maybe trying to beat Texas or Oklahoma and get one of those.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to like the front part of their schedule. You said they got beat 65-7. I wouldn't be shocked if they beat Colorado by that much in that first game. I think the same thing's true for Nichols. I think Houston's a unique test because it's a battle of really good offenses, I think. But they don't really get tested until that stretch. And so I think when you're looking at their win total, and it's tough, the bar for success is different now for this TCU team now that they went to the playoffs. I don't think anyone's really expecting another run quite like that. No. Not when there's not as much NFL talent on this TCU team, but I will say if they can kind of play spoiler to maybe Texas or Oklahoma down the stretch, I think that would be a fun little narrative, and I think most fans would call that a win for TCU after having some success last year.
Yeah, no. So over under 7.5 on these guys. That's a tough number because I do think they could maybe start the year 5-1 or 6-0 or whatever the case may be. Down that stretch, though, I mean, you got to win those two there. 7.5 is a perfect number. I would probably say over. I think they get to 8, but it's going to be very, very close. It's not one of those ones I'd maybe be comfortable, betting.
Yeah, I think they drop one of Kansas State or Baylor, but I think they do get one of those. Then they lose Texas Tech, Texas, Oklahoma. That gets them over. And so, I think I'd hit the over on TCU this year, which, like I said, the bar for success, I hope TCU fans are happy with that because, I mean, thinking back a few years ago, I think I'd never in their wildest dreams did they think they would be in a college football playoff. And now that they've got that taste, I hope an 8 to 9 win season isn't disappointing anymore.
Yeah, and I think realistically, so just talking about overall, like this is a good bridge year almost, kind of weirdly saying, like they can kind of develop Chandler Morris. He comes back next year. Oklahoma, Texas are out of the Big 12. They go to the playoff, which is 12 teams now. Then you have a shot. Then you build up that thing, and that's your kind of your outlook of like, hey, we can kind of go get it now. If they get to 8-9 wins, I think you should be very, very happy as a TCU fan. Yeah. Anything else on this outlook?
No, just still a good football team, and yeah. I think I believe in Sonny Dykes, and we didn't really even talk about the loss of Garrett Riley and what that means for the offense, but I think having Sonny Dykes there is a good step. I think he's building a really good program right now. We see it in the recruiting on the recruiting trail. So yeah, I mean, if you're a TCU fan, I think this is a good time to be a TCU fan because, like Kevin just said, the Big 12 is pretty open here soon. And so I think that this team is as positioned as any of these other teams to compete for Big 12 titles moving forward.
Yeah, and if they can hit that recruiting trail like they are in Texas, they can replace that Texas pipeline and go say, hey, we can make the playoff too. If you can get some of those 4 and 5 star kids to go there like they have been doing, you're in the money. Like, and then that's kind of where you get, and you get like a JoJo Earl and those guys to come back. You lost Riley to Clemson. Oh, well, you got Sonny Dykes, who's one of the most underrated coaches in college football. Like he can kind of build around that offense and those pieces. So we appreciate you guys tuning in. I hope you liked it, TCU fans. You're welcome for beating my Wolverines' ass last year in the college football playoff. I appreciate you guys. We'll check you guys next time.